Namo Sangaya. Namo Guru Me. Namo 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 Sangaya. Kande la je gun je do kane ra ga sho za bon de sho ze ze she je ya bo gun je lo san se da je ba ne de xie so so de je nan ga se de be de xie de lo mo je be dong ga je da lo de be se na xin cho yan ba ye che ge ja shu so so xie che zhen ge ja ve lo ge sa na ve jian zhu le xie su cha be be ye la me ze be gu o le zhen be te de la sha ye wo che ye na so me do da che xian do be na se che cha sho wo sha ye zhe che se na xian zhuo che la che ba bi ka xian do me de ne sa ba ye le ma ye ye me ga che 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 ba ra dong ba so ye me de sho nie ne je ba cha be so so sha nie me de ma de ro che ye ba be da ro de ye je go bo je ye la je ze ba la da ja sa ba da be ye ra che ze la ma da ba je na mo ye che gui ha la che ze che ne che da la sa be de je ze ma la sa je che sa wa du so na ma da ve se ye le xian ba ye so Rindu so Let us cultivate as best as we can at least contrived bodhicitta motivation, seeking complete enlightenment for the sake of all other sentient beings. And with that kind of motivation, we should participate in this Lamrim teaching on the stages of the path to enlightenment. Yes. Allow me to read about a folio or two from the Tibetan text to give you the blessing of oral transmission first. No. So he's reading from the special insight section.
Sumba de Konani de la Bebe Zulani de Kona, Yelajibera de Kona de Habas. Tabunin de Konani and the Vanakani, de Topara Jebeta, de Konani Jobe, Juba, Shindawashi, Goni, Chedano, Geshe, over de Kona, my machine, de Konani, de Tomjepa, de Tomjepa, Jaton Jeva, Yawashi, Dada, Kiran, number 27. Thereto was a deconation, Jego, deconation, Chadar Jubilee, Tamburo, Koy, Nijon, Sunday, Sunday. Tell Dorn de Jeva, Shego, Denin, Jumalo, no Mendo, Jumalo, no Mendo, Tony, Koy, Tokain, Tizaje, Jigda, Mari, Bako, Tower, Rulang, but Ting Tabani. June de bon de Bajama Maiba, Jeva, Shigu, Tenin, Jita, Doba, Ti Sumi, Dameva, Dobi, Sherava, Jalara, Lebatone, Da, de Gagu, Baton, Ton de Da de Yobala, Nusheda, Midrishi, London, Ripala, Yebashi, Nibashi, the Tabo, Tondu, near. Maybe Tommy do the Dada, the Gola, Rashinji, or Jungsi Jang. Jungsi Jang, me, Barang, Tawanin. Tizon Kobashi, Shoji, go over joy in the Tian, 6 years, Kadimobana, Ledon, Lunumta. Shibaba, the one driven on the data, the Konanya Manji, Onjang, Chise, Jonja, Lasabata, the Konanya Manji, the Shivana, the Konanya number 9. Yonder de Gona ne Kang Shin la de Gona la Joba, staying in a Jibashi. Nanda Shin over Mami Ba, Nanda Shi la Dawdin Zamba, Dakin Zamba, no to 7 de Gona. Tikona ni la Juba ni Mujono, Malun Judo, Tajola, Dandi, Tojin, Bedan, Goshi, Shavala. Oma Jole, Shavadan, Dena, Ninjaba, Diagonilla, Juba, Yuma, Joma, Rabu, Bon, Deva, Nico, the Chisajin, she did your topper. Sheila did your toba, no Judo, the Sajin, the Tonja, Danin, Judo, Tawa, the Migwa in Baton. Tabemi da Mami, Judo, Tawa Pushing. Jezo da Mami, Juda, Ponga, Pambe, Numo, Juma, Liban, Doba, Tommy, Kanshi, Dadu, Zimbe, Daji, the Geshe, Toma Dakan, Java, Dober, Shedo, Sonso, Shejim, Soso, Padu Meva, Rashi, Berry, Patvason, Nanjabe, Jubi, Sending Dordun, Dada, Dakio, Rashi, Meva, Della, Goba didn't Sashira, Georgie, Toyin, but Lobo Sanji, Janji, Sobala, Tenu, Lobo, Dasha, Zebain, Omala, Jovale, Kosaka, Dametomba, Naman Javaraji, Jojebani, Jabasheva, no headed netizen, Tegon, Jupiter, Dombai, Mayina did not data, Dakir, Zebaga, Seba, some. Zane Toby take on a YouTube, Miri, Dada, the Gola, Ranshi, Mevatella, Papa, Che, Della Papa. Maybe take on your Jubalam, do a Miruso, Yamna, Jomedi. Dada, the Kinzabano, Tamshit number 10, Sebal, Nile. You more Lara, Majeva, Jetin, Pampane, Timila, Yumaja, Chino, Chetanaki, no tribute, Samata, Jetin, Mamibi. Bamba Nishu, Jigui, Bichette, Dala, Rashimeba. Toba, Nive, Yala, de Jibu, Pumbana, Lava, Ranshingu, Panzaban, Doba, Rashavi, Hingda Zene, Hingda Zene, Kola Sabe, and Namaja, Nova Tsiba Shenos. That has Shavati. That doesn't really get in Changju Sim Jejo, Tigolia, Tony to Shuje, any tea to the Lama Kazation ended that the Tony Temple Shines.
So, as I announced last week, that I would take a little bit of time at the beginning to summarize some of the things we talked about with regard to generating bodhicitta and things we already talked about. And then after that, for the remaining time, I'm going to pick up from where we left off some time ago in the special insight section on selflessness, or we call Laktung Chemo, penetrative insight. And Geshe read from page 119 the stages of entry into reality to page 121. Okay.
That Changju Sim go that Tondu to Shuna. That Sim Jesu that you remember doing the Hinyan Jawa in She. But in Chava Kader, that Miko of the He Chavadua. Because the Chendechava says, yeah, Chendechava says the future, you know, in the massive nigger team you must say, no, you do so that this Lexo to Gangal, Simple Rally, and Kadishati, Chendechava, that he got Tanyu Chava said, Tanyu Chava did that. You remember doing it, Tanyu Gongur did, Tanyu Chava, Tata Tanyu Chava said, Simset of the odd they were jumped, Koviati, Tanyu Chava, Segua, or Tip Nisha, Nitigan like Rogizilla, John Gotham, John Tawada, changing this Gotham, Yondeta, what Tisha Nona, in the choosing the shower set, and you didn't take her. What Tisha should that in a Jeta in it, because Papa told me you remember doing share. In Geshe Shawala, the Kenyam Yin, that the Shuji Kadil, any Menga in Gasol Domni. In my Jewish, the Jesuits for the layer, what did that? Teach a party when the King to the Kenyam going to simply do the Yurimenga, the simply in Gadine, in the same idea, in Pendor share, that the Kevamura Mugo hit Sumandoa. That the Ninjim was says on the Shabema just on Lemton said. Ninja somebody to such loss your mother. You remember to go like someone is a Gongora. I didn't do it. The window hit the one.
So, in terms of cultivating bodhicitta, Changju Sim, we talked about two meditative techniques or approaches. And one is called 6 causes and 1 result technique, in Tibetan called Gyunde Mengatun. And so that comes down to us from Buddha and Maitreya to Asanga and so on. And then the other meditative technique for developing bodhicitta that comes from Buddha to Manjushri Shantideva and so on is called equalizing and exchanging self for others, Dakshin Nyamje in Tibetan. And so those are the two prominent techniques that we could use to develop bodhicitta in our mind. Now you ask, what's the difference between the 7 point technique and equalizing, exchanging self with others? We could say maybe there are 4 areas we can look into for the differences. Number 1 is in the case of 6 causes and 1 result technique, we said that we should reflect on the kindness of all sentient beings as having been our mothers or parents, right? But in the equalizing, exchanging self for others, we called it a special way to remember their kindness, others. What it really means is that not only when sentient beings have become our parents, they have been very kind to us, but at other times when they are not our parents, they are whoever they are, but still they are very kind to us, right? And so that's one difference we can see. And then the second area of difference is in terms of cultivating what we call a balanced state of mind or sense of equanimity, tangyom in Tibetan. And so with regard to the 6 causes and 1 result instruction, it's assumed that before we start that, we should cultivate a sense of equanimity, right? With regard to, sentient beings categorized into 3 kinds, right? Friends, enemies, and strangers, isn't it? But in the case of equalizing and exchanging self for others, again, we talk about a special, way for developing equanimity, tangyom Gyeltsen in Tibetan. Gyeltsen is that we try to see all sentient beings as wishing for happiness. In that regard, everybody is same. So on the basis of that recognition that all sentient beings seek happiness, there isn't any exception to the rule, then we cultivate sense of equanimity to them. We said, we wish all of them to be happy. Then another area where the difference is in the equalizing and exchanging self for others, we emphasize on investigating and reflecting on all the limitations and disadvantages of self-centeredness or self-cherishing attitude. Okay? That's really not kind of talked about in the 6 causes, 1 result technique. Then another area where the big difference is in equalizing and exchanging self for others, again, we talk about exploring all the benefits of and then reflecting on the benefits of cherishing others, right? But that's not really too much talked about in the 6 causes and 1 result instruction. So those are the 4 areas of differences. Now, if we add these 4 to the 7, then we have 11 points, right? It's an 11-point practice. So during the time of great Indian master Atisha, Dipankar Siddhijan Atisha, he received both lineages and he kind of integrated them together. And that's what the Lama Tsongkhapa received, right? So now if we follow this integrated meditative technique for cultivating bodhicitta with all the 11 points, right? And then this is considered as the most effective practice, most beneficial practice for cultivating bodhicitta in our mind.
Di laru chimu khadu di vise mendo ati lama so laru shenda dan do ati na dahin nim je di be saba yo res te salu sabdan do khare sen ta ga je kiding ye rob shi da rang ji ni be chen de la in du ngen do khade yong do shen ji ni chen de phe yong do khase do ju de sa bo ko ne di rig be pa ne ja de ja ja ni ya rig ba tong ya shi pi tin de shi do saba te men do seng ge ta da saba je song ja.
Although it's not specifically mentioned in the Lamrim text here, but in the words of the mouth of our lineage gurus, they often say, comparatively speaking, that equalizing and exchanging self for others is more effective in a profound technique than the 6 cause and 1 result technique for developing bodhicitta. And why is that the case? And so this is my understanding. That as I mentioned to you this before, that equalizing and exchanging self for others really constitute a critical approach to developing bodhicitta, right? We become very critical about selfishness, self-centeredness. Based upon our own everyday life experiences, we can see how the selfishness really, it sucks really, And also we might find many examples in our life why really benefiting others is the way to go. Okay? So this involves a lot of critical thinking, right, based on our own personal life experiences and observations in this lifetime. So maybe from that point of view, because it's a critical approach, so it's considered as, a more effective approach for developing bodhicitta as compared to 6 causes and 1 result in technique, which is the appreciative approach, right?
What is Karsa Saja Beijing song to Dera Saja Lige Mare. Rangi the Jen, na Shen Pemba Bashi Jis. So the big Devoji was got it. Yago Yundona, Shen Besha Larva. Said that this is that you keep a Shen to Shen around Yan do the Jibutel. Round the Yungora, Ranshin you get the Yungora. So this is all the go. See that someone who tank it.
So Geshe also personally feels that if we really do care about reflecting deeply about the benefits of equalizing and exchanging self for others, I think, as a matter of fact, it is very critical, provides critical insights and beneficial. And as he tried to quote the words of Sakya Pandita, and who said that if you really everything's going well for you, are very happy, then you really should think about the well-being of others. Okay? So what he's basically telling us is if we learn to benefit others, dedicate our life for others, in the process of doing this, our own needs are taken care of, isn't it? So by dedicating and working for others, both self and others' needs are met. On the other hand, if we're kind of completely sucked into selfishness, maybe we succeed in some ways to fulfill needs, then we are going to, be harmful, and in many ways we undermine others' well-being. So therefore, working for others doesn't mean that you have to give up all your personal needs. It's not the case. As a matter of fact, by working for others, we fulfill our own needs as well in the process. So that's a better approach to go.
다 기지 로진이 게 가서 님이다 현지의 표현도 지게 생이도 기지 로스 휴요 다디 다 소소 디가 알리 가르도 소소만 다 동도 들 작으러 그때 가제 망았다나 디디게야 흉차 용으로 와.
So I only provided you a couple of examples here and there last time and today, and so now if you really, engage in your own reflection and meditation on this approach, I'm sure you will discover many more examples, on your own, and those examples will contain those insights, deep insight into why, this approach, as a matter of fact, is a more effective approach for developing bodhicitta. Okay? In what ways self-cherishing attitude is an obstacle, it's a source of, misery, and in what way, altruism or cherishing others is the source of goodness and benefits.
어때 다 저기 심계다 되시 다 심계는 다 심마저 가지다 성dum을 줘 될다 되세도가 가르사 인 로봉 예방도 시 렌즈 로봉 매방도 땡이 종 렌즈 인도가 저다 로봉 예방도 시 로봉도 성주습에 동반되면 그거도가 저다 성주습에 동반되면 그거에다 다다 성주습에 동반다 왔다 다다 익숙하게 되면 제 벤지 이제다 제르모시 성주 형도서 나를 정도를 내발라 이네 디고를 세가서 성주심 계사고리스 디송을 가지 어느 정도를 내면 시다 위에는 네 랍중다 침바 강연용 무슨 때마당 예지 이제발 셰타발 롬데 봐버스 무슨 때마스니 무슨 깨봤다 많이 봐 예지 이제발 페이지 녀어 수바디를 쓰기로와 어때지 어때요다 다 다다디 라르시고 나래야 녀한니지마다 성주심 이네 배 고제고 송문도와 진짜 다들 군진 잘한 시바게 다 다들 라리셔모 대신 다시 남지 창лен도 비 니가 두고 있어 나 가지 저주 sem문이 제 무거셔 뭐니 지키는 네가 니가 두고 있어라 어디 지다 케베키 뒤니요라 와
알아 정주 슝람라 제베네 게 메슨 네바티 고로다 정주
무슨 뭐가 그거 전주 셈 때봤을라 무슨 때봐 어디
So then the next, after we talked about different techniques to develop bodhicitta, then we, went into the different types of bodhicitta: aspiring bodhicitta, practical bodhicitta, or engaging bodhicitta, Mönsim and Gyeltsen in Tibetan. Okay? So for the engaging bodhicitta, we said, one has to receive bodhisattva commitments or the vows, Changdong, right? Bodhisattva vows, and the way to, procure the vows, or acquire the vows, are two. Either on your own, in the presence of imagined Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, you can take the Bodhisattva vows, or you can receive the Bodhisattva vows, right, through ceremony conducted by a master. Okay? So in the case of receiving Bodhisattva vows through a master or from a master must be someone who has received and who abide by the Bodhisattva vows. Okay? And that's important. And then, of course, there are different scholarly perspectives or viewpoints with regard to, who really qualifies to receive the Bodhisattva vows or not. According to Penjin, Sonam Thakpa, and Rinpoche, in certain works like Changjub Shunglam, the Changjub Shunglam literally means the broad way of the enlightenment, right? Changjub Shunglam. So where they maybe it's more restrictive, they said in order to receive Bodhisattva vows, the person must have really generated the aspiring bodhicitta. Not like kind of, I like it kind of thing. No, you should have it. And then you're really committed to engage in bodhisattva actions. Then you're ready to go, receive it, right? But in this Lamrim Chenmo, the Lamrim text, and then according to Jamyang Sheba, they're a little more liberal on this. They said, no, they don't say you have to have aspiring bodhicitta. But you said, at least, you should thought about it and you really have that bodhicitta orientation. I really want it, right? If you have that, then on the basis of that and your strong wish to engage in bodhisattva actions, you can take the bodhisattva vows. So in terms of kind of a dominant practice is that we follow more like what is stated in the Lamrim Chenmo and what the Jamyang Shepa says. So we have a little bit more liberal approach to that, right?
이네 상주 흉능 표시 갱을 잠이서래. 너는 시모 공을 집이 생활 잠도 와. 제가 뜻이다 라르 시모 차샤고 가셔와. 치좀 차셔고 와. 이다 상주서 뭐니 있게 먹으나 거기 유한니스 고스모로 와. 유한니스들이 이게 예지 저와 러브다 랍. 인텔레 피게 피지 영요 시버고 와. 다 거기 야다 럼도 토사를 사서 다 드레스 사서 고로 와. 제 디레 과에다 다 디레스 고거래 저 랭갱게 에네 렌세 유텔이야 에네 셔즈베 domden 고거래 저 domden 라인 디레스다 베는 강조 다디와 마시 시게 다셔서 뭐보였다 밀라만도 타와게 뭐보였디 정식 셈문이 용견도 domden 주다 저 용용도 이제 상도 그봐 제가 텔링에 상도 지다 소도 비게 정유성 놈도 원에나 땡이 좀 라나 약속도 상도 그래봐 그 상전 간주 소도 대화여나 근데 비게 상전을 비게 그래서 추능 다스나 이래 뭐겠지 상시 고모 고 체험적인 거 되게자 요 말아 제가 텔 로데한테 용으로 와 렌사도 거기에서 꼭 저도 너무 매우셔 렌세 이라 매우셔 근데 신나 신나도 봐 죽통 말아 어디 게 삼자래다
So Geshe is not very sure about that, but he thinks that Lama Tsongkhapa composed Changjub Shunglam, Broad Way to Enlightenment, before Lamrim Chenmo, the great treatise on the states of enlightenment. The Lamrim Chenmo was authored when Lama Tsongkhapa was 45 years old, much later time. So on the basis of that, so we assume that maybe by that time he has more matured in his thinking, matured, all his expertise, everything. So maybe we follow more of what is stated in the Lamrim Chenmo rather than what he said in the Broad Way to Enlightenment, Changjub Shunglam. Okay? But that's his take on it, Geshe-las. And then in terms of taking bodhisattva vows, as I already mentioned, either you can take them on your own in the presence of imagined Buddhas and Bodhisattvas or from a master. And if we are going to take from master, then master, if possible, the best case is the master himself or herself has to be bodhisattva with the bodhisattva, vows, and that's the best thing. But that's really hard to, I'm trying to be judgmental about others or myself, but, in our Dharma centers, where do we find them? It's kind of rare, isn't it? The real bodhisattva masters, who can give us that. So this is my personal opinion. My means Geshe-las, his voice, right, not the translator. I think maybe it's better to take the bodhisattva vows on your own in the presence of imagined Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Because if you really sincerely, take the vows in the presence of your visualized Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, I think you will feel much better, more confident. Because Buddhas, if you have a faith, Buddhas, have the omniscient mind. They're always present and they, there. So you will feel much better rather than you take the bodhisattva vows from somebody like me, right? Then you kind of maybe I got, maybe he has, maybe I don't know, kind of we are not so sure about somewhere, And I'm saying this because I know myself the best, so I know who I am, okay? So I would advise, say my personal opinion is if you are interested to take bodhisattva vows, of course you read about the bodhisattva literature, you think about that a lot, you have certain sort of a personal relevance and connection experience that yes, this really makes sense, You have a bodhicitta orientation. You really said, I can do it. Yes, Then maybe take the bodhisattva vows in the presence of visualized Buddhas and Bodhisattvas because you never go wrong with that because the Buddhas are always present there, rather than take it from somebody like me, you know.
我的那上一个这样的嘞，被是不是这个东西呢？那东站是这个东西呢？这个节日嘛，这个东西这个嘎子考个呀，这节约嘛是吧？现在这种节约嘛是吧？考对那可能千件吧，所以说这个台湾这的熊草呢，那不能。 나가 좀 속이나 최유는 나가 숨이 시작을 최면은 시작을 말아. 나 소소 가게 면은 시작이야 말아. 뭐또 소소 지야 자기들 땡배 죽을 근데 디 지남도 죽정 비 상지가 군들 간들 요요 가도 디 이제 다 때문에 쉬고 그런 거더라.
So really, I really mean it seriously. You know, you take the Bodhisattva vows in the presence of visualized Buddha and Bodhisattva, because Buddhas are always present, right? They're omniscient, and there's no such case as like, you know. When you are taking Bodhisattva vows, it is like, you know, Buddha is kind of busy and attending to some other people, and therefore, you know, he really can't think about you. There's no such case like that. And Buddha's, you know, wisdom is omniscient, it's always present there. Okay? And if you don't fail in your faith and sincerity, I don't think Buddha is going to fail you at all. And the example Geshe gives is just like, you know, full moon day, the sky is clear, and the bodies of waters are very clear anywhere in the world. Then that moon is going to reflect in, right, all the water bodies, as long as they're very receptive, isn't it? There's no such thing like moon says, I'm going to shine on you, but I'm not going to ditch that water body, right? It doesn't do that. So is the case with Buddha and Buddha's omniscient mind.
nomba sungde da muzum shoga sunga da jugdum sunga yin do muzum da jugdum sunga yin she da muzum sunga del koran ene ka labza khelen ka ya ma res 제가 chawju sem je gi sim de ta ju chawju sem je gi yin shoga lang wa ju re ma ji mixel da tamja ke gu min do en labza song thom do ka song mo do na len cho wa da jugdum le ge na en labza song ma do na jugdum le ya ma res mixel labza song to ye na in terms of domalangita domba sadung jogi da nishigang songuro wa de songmadon neayo mares.
So in terms of what are called liturgy or the ritual choga, there is you know liturgy you know for taking or generating aspiring bodhicitta. Okay? And you could use that to be able to generate aspiring bodhicitta most sincerely. And this doesn't involve making any commitments, right? You're not saying, I'm going to now do this and that. You're just saying, I really wish to become a Buddha for the sake of sentient beings. And you strongly generate that mind. And through the liturgy or the ritual, you can generate that. Now, in the case of Bodhisattva commitments or the vows, unless you're really sure about it, you know, don't jump into that, right? Because if you're not sure, like you can keep the commitments not, then you really, it's better to be safe than sorry later, so to speak, right? And if you think, okay, I'm ready, I want to take it, then you can, through the liturgy or the ceremony or the ritual, you can take the Bodhisattva vows on your own. And so once you take the Bodhisattva vows, then you study about them, right? What are the 18, you know, transgressions, root transgressions, and what are the 40 plus, you know, secondary vows and all of that.
Da lembe kap karchi wesno tikor sida karchina and kunjo so cha ro go lengu se telendu da cheba de ya so so jonna in so be no lunju re be ne trouble lo me yong se khaze mang sham go res men ya be da cheba shamya mendu singa len so ma sa dire simri go ma res jo da do de ke zanale re khaza be jaru sim che se adi jor si lam shimo ke do se so ga yo de hingdo je mu shime na digo ya ko o ti pu ni digo res.
So what is involved in you know, generating aspiring bodhicitta or taking the bodhisattva vows is is based upon going for refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, right? Going for refuge is the foundation for that. And so to be able to do that and also generate bodhicitta, we need to make a lot of offerings, right, to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So in terms of making offerings, if we could afford, right, if we're capable of, then we should, you know, do as best as we can, you know, make the best offerings, right, and elaborate in variety, right. Don't be kind of a little stingy or sort of, you know, on that. But if you don't have anything, but then don't make that an excuse like, well, I have nothing to offer, right. I mean, it can be just one fruit, right, as is stated in the Gyeltsen Sutra for the Fortunate Ones. as Geshe quoted, that there was a case of how you could offer just a piece of cloth, right, ordinary cloth, and then that being the offering, you can generate bodhicitta. Okay, so if you can't afford to make offerings, that cannot be excuse not to, generate bodhicitta or take the vows.
어디 다 렌다데 다 랑사니 송자데 다 에데 무즘 라나티 다 송자스 베 카사 데 무즘 도마스 미세데 요마라바 신나다 티케 람바인도 티야 센델 주 카사 무즘 메냠발 에네 카사 시데 시제 제 치말 메모 카사 나부시 방바세야도와 거주시도와세야도와 다 센델 엔드 카데세노 티시고레스 카사 에니 무슨 평용사마직 엔데네 니 간제 니샤지 투도 무슨 랭고가 다 간제 데네 가르사 심정로 미동 지그러와 딘 초사바스 저 초사바세 다는 디 초가즈는 요사 말아봐 야중 초가즈는 초사바세데 요 말에세 이나데 에니 계셔물이 라마 고마서 송샤스 인데 펜도샤 노 런리셔먼도 어디 송도와 어디래.
So once we have, let's say, generated aspiring bodhicitta, well, aspiring bodhicitta does not involve commitments or samayas, right? But it does involve some precepts we call advices concerning this practice. And advice is categorized into two, as we talked about this. There are 4 positive actions, practices we can do to be able to facilitate aspiring bodhicitta development in this life. And there are 4 negative actions that we should abandon so that we are able to continue with aspiring bodhicitta in our future lives. So in the case of the 4 positive actions, we talked about one is to really reflect on the benefits of aspiring bodhicitta. That will inspire you, that will encourage you, that will bring you the joy. Okay, and another one is we generate aspiring bodhicitta like 6 times, right, in 24-hour time period. That's what it said. Generate 3 times a day, 3 times at night. That's how we usually say it. And then the third one is we should, in our minds, that I'm never going to give up on any sentient being, right? Not forsaking any sentient being. And then the number 4, we said we should engage in the accumulation of merit and wisdom. But in the Indian, original source texts, this is not there, accumulating merit and wisdom. But Lama Tsongkhapa said, I have heard through the words of lineage masters, accumulating merit and wisdom is so essential for spiritual growth. So therefore, he kind of, so to speak, added it, right? This is the 4th positive action to facilitate aspiring bodhicitta.
That 제가 치말 메뉴에 들어야 에네 가우시기도 나우지시 본세야지도와 데다 데레 나우지 당보데려 다 랑게네 로본도 라마 그자 로본도 켜보시 에네 지네래야 에네 뒤지 오거라시 아다 디녀모데 가르세는 가주 더 히바데레다 심지 강제지나 어텔베게 주인들에게 베게 소셔름 세계세요 아니 메마셔고레스 어디다 디녀모데레 와다 주인산 마이게나 켈로 오거라요 말와 어디
So I think I have to rephrase it. The 4 things I just mentioned to facilitate aspiring bodhicitta, they are not really the 4 positive actions per se. They are the 4 facilitating factors. So the first one is reflecting on the benefits of aspiring bodhicitta. The second one is generating aspiring bodhicitta 6 times a day. And the third one is not to forsake sentient being. And the 4th one is accumulating merit and wisdom. Okay. Now the 4 Nakpucheshi, I think in your translation they said the 4 dark practices or something. I said 4 negative actions. And the Kalpecheshi, the 4 light practices or the 4 positive practices, right? These are to help us to maintain bodhicitta here and then continue in the future lives. So those belong together actually. That's what I need to redo. So the first dark practice or the negative practice that can diminish our bodhicitta is if we, we deceive our gurus and spiritual abbots in the case of monastics, and then those who really trust you, right, your benefactors. Yeah? So that can diminish the bodhicitta development. So as an antidote to that, the fourth light practice or the positive practice is we commit not to lie to anybody, any sentient being, right? If we said, period, I'm not going to cheat and lie to any sentient being, then that'll take care of not lying to, deceiving our gurus and abbots and the benefactors, you know.
that knows you about the dero. Simply can I give us you give what you was said. The teaching model the dero herself. Knows you he was the wrong pig, that wrong pig, wrong to look in that, so to be rally, simply country in any lam member. Tiba member lam tidel pa majib, Tiba Shibu lamlia, Goya, any pig, song beton shivatel, or did that, then the data. Does you Nipa Simjian, Gyashe was Simjian, and Jibakesh was teaching about the shadow. So that Simjian, the social rally, Simjian, the big Sanji Komal, you do good, Lord Cheba did you know, in the cock Golamukolia, Jibakesh Shumarva, what he is.
No. And then another negative action or the dark practice that diminishes bodhicitta is making others regret for positive actions, virtues that they do. Yeah, as we talk about this, like yeah, kind of what you do is kind of that you know, not such things. And to counteract that kind of negativity, you know, in the positive practices, the actions, the light practices, we talked about how in our mind, you know, if we have this wish that, you know, all sentient, especially those who trust me, I'm never going to misguide them, right? And really my priority is I would like to help them be on the path to enlightenment, right? Not for anything less than enlightenment. So if we have that kind of a state of mind, then we are never going to, how should I say, discourage anybody from doing virtue or making them regret for their virtue.
Well, till that decision, the coronavirus, said the social pay, those on go, Tapi share Mojo, Koparu, Simpson to be those on go, mother of Nayan, so the Neva Yomarisunda, drop to Maris.
And as I stated here in the text, and I talked about this last time, that from our side, we do as best as we can to encourage, inspire others to be on the path seeking you know, enlightenment. But if the others really are not interested or they don't follow the path, so that's not going to be your fault. And that's why my American translation, not your problem.
Oh, that knows you somebody, and shows you somebody, any Napa May said, but these Yimodelia, and shows them the cottage in the Telia, and the Tombe Digitiati. Shadow, said that the Tombe Digitomal Dangan to Teva you got that. You want to take your view. Tomal not to cook your attackers.
Then the another negative action or the dark practice is to kind of belittle bodhisattvas, right? And now the antidote to that in the light practice or the positive practice is if we regard bodhisattvas as if they are Buddhas, enlightened beings, then we are never going to belittle them. And Geshe was chuckling over this. The reason is that at least, you know, all of us, we assume that we have so much faith in Buddha as enlightened being, right? Sometimes we might have a little problem less than the Buddha, like, yeah, you know, you're not Buddha yet, so maybe, you know. So bodhisattvas are in that category, right? You're not Buddha yet, so I have a little issue with you. But with Buddha, we don't. Buddha is Buddha, enlightened being, I've got total faith, right? So if we learn to regard bodhisattvas as if they are Buddhas, well, we have no problem now, right?
Oh, that is no Shiva de Last member in the Garza, Yogi Shiva said, so that the Lasum said the young Mundu Pig, so the big legal court long with Lasum de Ravendoa. Lasum said the Simba Ranshima. San Mali, some Ranjiko, believe some tongue, the Lasum said Lavdoa. She had in the Simji Kandaji, Tongue Kona, get big Ranjisha model, think you somewhat of that mail there. Redwa, or did that now she went younger? Thousand member Yogi Shiva says you are?
No.
No.
And then the last sort of dark practice or the negative action is, you know, how we are not sincere in our, you know, dealing with sentient beings. So we are being pretentious, you know, and so we can be kind of tricky, you know. And the Tibetan words, which I always say as difficult to translate, are the yoju, right? Which is like pretending to have the realizations, qualities we don't have, right? We put that nice face, kind of a social face out there. and that, or that we conceal all the limitations, weakness we have, so that we look like enlightened already here. Well, that's my footnote, by the way. And that diminishes our bodhicitta. So if we learn to be sincere in our relationship in dealing with sentient beings, then we are not going to be pretentious. We are not going to conceal our, the limitations from them.
초계 랑바세야 딜이야 ene tamzik karsa labja de hotel da lamdon de wale shedu do ata ngande tanda gombo karsa yebo enda budine ma jebe khanje sidi da ngande namjin ta cha shaza be kerbo goma cha shaza dyune jo shala sopa do da konje deva injesen da ma sheunde zana deva benra de himudo现在开始对吧？几把天的用过了哇？我提示大概是提把线的，这里呀，你讲究了这个了，你那些帮我下这样子，相当这些，样做这些的，可是都是相当的，你的个啥，讲究了这个了，你那些帮我相当，你好像可是的冲突都是的，像是不是都就是我的呢？你冲突都是。是吧？但你像那样，这个呀，你到处送吧，他们这当，你开始这边来修不明显老不是，这边来修吧是平时通了明显的哒，刚刚老不是还是都，这些呢，养切肉都是，是吧？不是要在你切肉都是，你主动给，不给拉在，你主动拉在那边呢，你自动就接的，你些现在的些肉都送下么一些。Laws can go Martina Gangan Zudu
And then in terms of what are the bodhisattva commitments that we need to keep once we have taken them, and then there is a reference to a commentary on the Lamp of Path to Enlightenment, Bodhiprada Pradipad. So in that commentary, the way they contextualize is the things they talk about there, really it comes down to this great luminaries like Indra Bodhi, Shantideva, the 7 of those luminaries mentioned. Like, according to them, these are the commitments. So they brought different viewpoints, right? One, they said, well, in addition to the refuge precepts, then you should abandon the 4 dark practices. So that constitutes the commitment. And then the real response to that is, well, do you mean like these are the commitments to aspiring bodhicitta or the engaging bodhicitta? Aspiring bodhicitta has no commitments. For engaging bodhisattva, these are too few, right? So you have really gone a little too low on this one. They don't. Because usually for the engaging bodhicitta vows, we have 18 root vows and 45 or 6 secondary vows, right? That includes everything. So you're a little too short on that. That doesn't work. But then some said, no. In the sutra, there's a statement like everything Buddha said in the sutra. And then there's a mention about how everything that Buddha talked about until you reach the path of seeing, all of those things. That's a too big a commitment. You're putting too many things here. So that is over the board, right? You are either underestimating it, you're overestimating it. So all of those views are not correct views. Okay, that's what the Lama Tsongkhapa is clarifying to us. Like, although you said it comes from Indra Bodhi, Shantideva, all of that, like, no, you are rather misattributing to them. This is not what constitutes commitments.
that when that Lamdun join church in Jawa Marabe in the Chamujo Karesena in the Lamdun Jawa at the end that Jawa Dundon by Majiva Lamdun Jawa church in Jawa Chago Mares. That not a lot of Juja to my Chago Res. So that the Jawa did not any Lihia Mambo dos, nor the Wakashi dos. So that any Jerobosia. Lihi to go to Valavin Tommy Kazaka Dayus. That's not the Shahara. That Northern to Kade North, Yunda did share your receipt. Karsa, Choja, any 2 Buranlia, Lamdon, did some. And then the sign ladies only Choja that there's Gerton as here. That the Choja that did so in Jira. Did that Choja mother not so Koran Gerton. But the Gerton anything. That Kadamge Lama the Lasor said because the Puni come to get you to church at Namda Shivalia, Nozukuni Shivala. But that gets church at Namda the she any chances with the she but that didn't what Jesus.
So as we talk about those things, then somebody raised the question, but isn't that commentary on the Bodhiparta Pratibha, the lamp enlightened by Atisha? How could Atisha get it wrong? No, wait, yes, Atisha was requested to write a commentary on his own Lamrim, auto commentary, and which he did a very abbreviated one at the Purang, western part of Tibet, right? And then later when he was in Samye, central part of Tibet, I think Nakso translator, Nakso Lozawa with Atisha, and then Nakso kind of talked to Atisha like, Master, I think there needs elaboration here and there, so how about that, right? And then probably Atisha said, okay, go ahead, right? So Nakso started to expand Atisha's commentary. In the process of doing that, and he got things right and he got things wrong. Okay, that's what Lama Tsongkhapa was saying. He said, there are many good things, Nakso has in that commentary, and I acknowledge that where he got it right, I have quoted it in different parts of my Lamrim. But the things he got it wrong, such as the ones we talk about commitments here, so Lama Tsongkhapa says, I'm clarifying it to you. This is not Atisha's explanation. This Nakso got it, right? Added to that. So then why it becomes sort of acceptable when is a Kadamba master called Geshe Laksovar. I think he went to study with Nakso translator. Nakso is a great translator, And so Nakso gave him the teaching he received from Atisha and everything, like in the process of telling all those things. So he must have taught the same thing, these things to Geshe Laksovar. So then Geshe Laksovar and his students continued to believe in that. This is what my master told me, right? So now Lama Tsongkhapa is coming like, no, that didn't got it right. So I have to clarify that.
What did it? Just the day that the London do the Pesha Hedana and you that the Tazato Yidale church and Maria Senior Yore said Tiramo Segas came into that the Larisham would say what do I? So that the kids a long time this dear mark during the Kaji Karsa loved that to Jonga to Yakis the Larisham was Hakahi Matology. But some sort of diction to the Hivis.
So this kind of thing is mentioned sometimes in our monastic, textbooks. But then they don't tell you exactly, whose commentary it is. But in this Lamrim Chenmo, it has been very clarified, And I want to make sure that, so I have read this portion of the Lamrim like a couple of times myself, so make sure that I got it, right? So before I explain it to you. So I think Lama Tsongkhapa has been very clear here that this commentary may be attributed to Atisha, but it's really not Atisha's commentary, but it's the expanded commentary by the Ngok Losawa, right? The translator Losawa, and where he got things right, he got things wrong, and Lama Tsongkhapa is clarifying those, right?
Oh, dear, that the Kursa Tondi to Hia Karesana, that not to be so you come on, say the Tony Transon, take Shoshu that don't you hear into you know you did, say that Shoshu got it, say here to Yang here in days.
And what is my rationale behind? I said today I would like to summarize, right? The things we talked about, bodhicitta, cultivation, and commitments. It is because for us practitioners, right, our ultimate wish and the goal is to become Buddha. Enlightenment is our goal. And to get there are two things we must do. We have to generate bodhicitta, and we have to integrate that with wisdom gone beyond, or wisdom realizing emptiness, right? Without these two things, we can never be a Buddha. So these are very essential for our spiritual development and path. So because of that importance, I thought I should take a time to summarize the things that we talked about a couple of weeks, about bodhicitta development.
What did that on the Lakdong here? That's our and some Jawa and the Lakdong was a day. That's some Jawa Mokoshe. Lakdong Shawatella, Lakdong saw them by Shet. And the Lodong Radio, Lakdong Shada Gumbi, Gumbi 2, Gumbi Lakdong gave it, says Hidua. That he knows that the Dino Domodel Lakdong saw them at the and then Changdong and Dangedong the Nguswashi, and then Gobble little Gomba Chita 2 shet. In the Tikwaya Del Papas, some shit. That Tongdong Yedong, the Gobble go by any that Sanji and the Lindins out of it to the Gangazing on the Rosarwa. That Tikwaya Del Papas said, take a Tigal and Driver. What did it? But that Saji Saji Shisherwa. No. You don't the Lama Sungi, Saji the limits Yegures. Saji will relate on Tomba Lam Jumps 사지단이 똥바단이 샤요 말 그 리밍로 카도고도 양한 거지.
No, so.
양에 가세요 내면아.
No, so.
다때 빼도선 대셔 얼베나. 대저 니가 잡서 삼로시라 마다시.
No.
대저 통신 삼로단다 최셔월 미땡도 쇼등아 바자네 사다 쓰텔 메바 디레싱아 바시다 자시. 근데 뭐 최초가 삼로단 년년도 때셔나 간섬 깔래 가오네. 아우 다들이 바자도 샤양 야 심할 다 검속에서 좀 연구로 와.
No, right.
어때 텐션이가 맞아 뭐 종사로 와.
Uh-huh.
당보 동시이가 사면은 인람서 밀리토야 샤기들 랭거 말어 봐.
No, right.
어 종으로 용도 된대 용 거를 가지.
No, so.
재미 가가 까온 걸 쓰기도 와.
No, so. No. So now we're going to go back to Lakdong, the special insight section from Lamrim, which is the volume number 3 in the English translation of Lamrim Shenmo. So when we look back on the major outlines, there is a whole outline section connecting. It's like a bridging, right? A bridge connection outline. And we don't need to deal with that, we already did. And then the second one is the actual special insight development, like Lakdong Ngue. Now this is presented under 4 major subpoints. The first one is Gyeltsen. What are the essential things we must have? We sometimes call preliminaries, prerequisites, right, for that. And then the second one is the types of special insight, the divisions, if you will, called Rabie. And then the third one is how to cultivate special insight, the gomsul, right, the meditative technique, if you will. And then the fourth one is how do we know we have it? What is the criteria, right, for judging that we have it? So those are major subpoints. And so in the context of prerequisites or the Gyeltsen, preliminaries and prerequisites, we talked about a number of things. We already talked about how do we differentiate between 장애, that which is definitive, and that which is interpretable, right? We talked about that distinction. Then we also talked about what is the actual intent of Nagarjuna with regard to the ultimate reality. What is Nagarjuna's standpoint here, right? We talked about that. And then establishing what the reality is, Tekonanyi, Tathatha, or the reality. And then we talked about, the perspective about the reality that comes down, the different perspectives like, what is what is called, the Baba Viveka's perspective on reality. What is the Buddha Palitas, on that? What is the Chandagiti talking about that, right? So those things we already talked about. And so now we're on page 119, although it's not called 119, but it is. And the caption reads, those who have maybe the e-book, the stages of entry into reality, right? That's from where Geshe read about. And so Geshe also reminds us that according to our lineage masters, Sajje outlines are very important for us to, if possible, memorize in our mind, and our outlines should be complete. Okay? There should not be missing in our outlines. And then for each outline, the major, the outline and the major subpoint, the sub-subpoints, whether we know too much about it or not, we should at least have something, right, to think about for each outline. That's very important. If we have something missing in the outlines, we will have incomplete contemplation, reflection, okay? And to illustrate that point, Geshe gives this example. Let's say, we talk about reflecting on the precious human life, right? And how rare and difficult it is to obtain precious human life. Let's say we miss the rare and difficult to obtain the precious human life, right? We could just completely focus on the preciousness of the human life, the life that's endowed with 18 qualities, and how wonderful, I have it, I'm so happy, hallelujah, this is what I have, I'm great. And then we're doing our practice. Sometimes we're very inspired, we're doing a practice. Other times we're kind of sluggish, like, okay, well, there's next life, I'll do it next life. Yeah. The reason why we procrastinated, put it on the next life, is we really did not think about the rarity and difficulty finding precious human life again, isn't it? If we think about that a lot, we are not going to trust too much in the next life, because we should do everything possible here, because next life we don't know. Am I going to get this again or not? So that's why we miss one, contemplating the rarity and difficulty to find human life again, precious human life, right? That's how it's very important for us to have the complete outlines with all the subpoints. And whether we have too much to think about each of this outline, we know a lot, we don't know a lot, we should have something, right, to think about for each, outline. Yeah.
어디를 다 그게 냐우는 강사서도 엄부 림드발이야 뿌이타루를 약래 나도 연구를 와
Right.
어디를 뭐기 이 강사들도 몽고들에는 강바도 닝마야란 다바 잡지 이 강바서요 와
Right.
다 딩상 빌라사시에 인사와 시부 약버서요 와
Right.
다 그인가 뿌이타루요 뭐 이제 더다 강배 챙이인가 찍바라 와
Right.
진짜 보고 그래서
So, of course, we individuals differ in terms of our human faculty and intelligence, isn't it? Some of us maybe are able to retain more, understand more deeply, whatever. And others are not that deep, but we should have some complete understanding of something at our level, isn't it? So that's important for our practice. And the example Geshe gives here is, thinking back about their early days in the Mongol. Like when first they got there, they lived in the huts, plastered with the muds. That's their housing. Okay? Now today, it's more like a town with modern buildings and all of that, right? Now, what is the difference? Yeah, in terms of facilities is better, but in terms of the real characteristics, the hut plastered with the mud is a house, but they sheltered you. And this modern building with the facility is just sheltered you. They have the same characteristics, right? So that's what it is. So your living conditions has gone up, but basically it's serves the same purpose. You got the shelter over your head, right? So in the same way, people who have more sort of sharp intelligence, they may be able to think more deeply, whatever case may be. Others who are not that sharp, at least they can think. But we all must have the complete, right, sort of points to think about. Okay, we may differ in terms of intelligence, but the basic requirement we all should have. Okay.
어디를 다그 뿌이타야 뭐지지 그게 다 대사다 이제 중앙 상주세요 저거서 lun가서 저도 찍어지잖아 어디 뒤에 쉬는 뒤에 세워 라마 숨기 뒤에 이제 강당 체에서는 지금 말했어 근데 lun가 저 중앙 상주 찍으면 지금 말아 어디 강당 산에 뿌이타가 해야요 말았어 소소도 라이파스 그랬지
That's what some of the teachers say, for a basic living condition, you should have a bedroom. Maybe you need a toilet or somewhere, right? It's attached or it's not attached, but you need to relieve, yourself. And you need to have some place to cook something, right? It's called kitchen or it's called neck or whatever, right? Because those are the basic things without which life can't function, right? Now you have everything going well, then you have attached bathroom, and then your bathroom is like, so clean and wonderful, like wow. And then you have a wonderful kitchen and all kinds of great food are cooked. Well, that's elaboration, isn't it? But basic things must be there to be able to survive, right? So that's what we're talking about. Whatever level we are at, we should have all the basics to be able to do our practice. Now you can elaborate on it, you can refine it based upon your intelligence and other abilities. That's great,
어디 다 다나게 되게 초동들이 다디 이제 뒤줄 다 다나데 뒤거에 떼는 봐서 뒤는 알리 뒤 지단데 텐주에 다와라 이제 당매 투모도 거야 되면서 요 말이 신나 이제 라마 고마도 야 이제 랍자 되는데 방신 신나 때에 이게 땡시 약보 요래 송샤 제가 당매 투모서 고 때 주인스
Of course, our goal here is to be able to precisely understand Prasangika Madhyamika's standpoint on what the ultimate reality is, right? That's kind of our goal. But that being said, according to the lineage masters, they also want to kind of lead us to that very skillfully. So as part of that skillfulness, we are going to talk about what we call the common viewpoint about selflessness, right? What is commonly accepted as selflessness before we really go to the Prasangika's view, right? So I'm going to do that here.
어디 다 너무 투모서 가르세나 다다 군nhân 시백 때 텐주에 가가셔서 저 모두 현직발 다 텐주와도 듣다 시각이 돼야 당매 저러 어디 당매 투모 될 세워러 다 될 가사랑 야테베 저기 동 봤어야 어디 샤워 가서 남지 해야 되고 그러다 어디래 있다 어디 다 가사랑 해도 동 봤어야 될 것이
Now, Master Kunchen Jamen Shepa has a little different take on perspective about what constitutes a common view of the selflessness and what is the Prasangika's view like that. So let's not going to go there. But usually when we say common view on selflessness, what we really refer to is what is commonly accepted by all the four schools of Buddhist tenets, right? What is accepted by the four schools of Buddhist tenets. And that viewpoint is considered as common view on selflessness. And that view is Kangsa Rangjatube Zeyuji Tongba. It is selflessness which is posited in terms of absence of self-sufficient Rangjatuba and Zeyuji Tongba, self-sufficient and substantially existent self. Okay, Rangjatube Zeyu. Is there a self that is substantially existent and self-sufficient? The answer is no. And that emptiness or the selflessness is accepted commonly by all the four schools of Buddhist tenets of the thought, Drutashi in Tibetan. Okay.
Oh, there is a Raja Tevase, I think that the Kade Zigo or Sena. There is that Kansa Pumbol Mata Mayuba. Kansa Da said, Pumbol lost. That lost Trubatabuta, Tanya Diago Marita, Tonda Rabashina, Pumbol lost you Zingua, or tell that Rajate the possible.
So, what is this self-sufficient, substantially existent self notion? Is according to this view, self is not something imputed onto the collection of physical and mental aggregates. That's not. But they said, apart from the aggregates, there is self that exists substantially and self-sufficiently. Okay? So that's the notion of self-sufficient and substantially existent self. Apart from the aggregates, psychosomatic aggregates, there is a self, right? That is self-sufficient and substantially existent.
Did they consider this and that? The Ngara Tatung Benala? Namde Talam says, "No, just so you what this say you don't do. Stick at this and this or that. Monto Dada Pumbatas Kansa Pumbanga Yorha. Said the other Pumbatako doing them, but the Duja, Subung Duja with Naze gave us didn't Nasa Mengi, Super Yachi, the Jia Suna. It part Jago saying, go tea, the Pumbanga, so Pumbanga party, do it party, Yanga Sui language. Or some was doa. Oh, that dress you were that. She wanted Pumba doesn't mean, though the parties and the Yaga language, Umara. Do parties and another language dig doa.
That did something that is
Pumba got party, Yaga language. Language they had or that. When they said the Pumba doesn't mean the Pumba do parties, language like a bar. What is it? What the Koag night, what of the sea should wear. Language, you see what is so
no, so. And so, of course, based upon my own study and readings, Geshe said, where he found the most clearest explanation about what is self-sufficient, substantially existent self-notion, is in the text called Namde Talam Selje, illustration of the path to liberation. Okay, Namde Talam Selje, the Tibetan maybe title should be preserved. And so in this text, it stated that, of course, each of us has 5 aggregates, right? Physical, mental aggregates. So we have aggregated form, and we know related to aggregated form, we face a lot of problems, right? Body can get sick and, all of that. So we have a feeling like, well, in our mind. So it's just like, what? If I get a chance to ditch this body, which is the source of so many pain and headache, right? I can get another body that has no pain at all. I want that body. The same with the feelings. Yeah, some of these feelings are yucky. I don't like this, If I can have an aggregate of feeling that's perfect in a sense, right, I want that one too, right? So there is that sense of I in us, right, in notion. And that notion of I we have is already substantially and self-sufficiently existing notion of self. Okay? If we ever think that self is imputed onto the aggregates, when the aggregates is not there, let's say if I'm going to exchange my yucky aggregates, right, there's no such exchange. When I get rid of my yucky aggregates, my self is gone, right? It's imputed on that. But the fact that I'm thinking that I want to exchange the bad one for the good one, right? I want all the good ones, like pick and choose all the good aggregates for myself, ditch all the bad ones. That sense of notion of self we have is, I think, is clearest notion of, this self-sufficient, substantially existent self.
Did that going to be Pumbo laws look some Ming the tiny jar, Tom the tiny jar in Zingo Marisi.
No,
The Hindu country yard, the Lijim Yoro,
no,
Mindo Jazz in Zima May, Tongo Yodo said, Kanjita.
no,
Don't that going to be a law, Tanda Lijim would take you a Kadore. Raji try some the Yoma, the Tamil big Sharita to the Tonda in Zinanda Yori Songra. That there you worry.
So that sense or notion of self exists in us, right? Whether we know the linguistic version of that or not, like, oh, that's a self-sufficient, subsistent existence I have. No, we have no clue about that linguistic terminology, right? We don't care about that. In reality, that notion of self exists in us. As Geshe referred back to Lecture Nyingbo, eloquent explanation of essence of eloquent explanation. In the section on Pasankika Madhyamika viewpoint, where we talk about the notion of intrinsic self, isn't it? That notion of self exists in every sentient being, regardless of sentient beings have a language to talk about, like, yeah, I got the intrinsic self here, like you don't have, no. Whether we know, right, the labels, the linguistic, the terminology about intrinsic, not intrinsic, whatever, but the fact remains that in our mind, we have that notion, okay? So the same here. Whether we know how to say there's a self-sufficient, substantially existent, blah, 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 or not, but the fact remains that in our mind, such a notion exists.
What is that? Didn't know that children do in the dark by that said, what knows to tell the shower? Because that Ninja was sat about to do it. Now you would do James Guya.
No, sir.
I said that does. But the Los Angeles town, the only Los Angeles Suboton, Los Angeles, San Logic to us.
No,
Tonga Subomi Tongo Maravas.
no.
And it goes Subula Majes, Los Angeles Logic to us.
Not
So
it.
Los Angeles go Subo, Lord, you've done, then go to see what is it.
So in a text like Nenjo Jebesa, which is Yogic Bhumi, right, text name, Nenjo Jebesa, I think they give like 8 different, when we think in terms of the non-Buddhist view about self, right? They say self is permanent. I think because they have been really thinking a lot how the self appears to them. So they think there is a permanent self. And then they give 8 great reasons. They said, well, this is the case, how it should exist. Okay? And one of the reasons is, if we look at somebody called Lobsang, right? And what we see is the visible form of the Lobsang approaching us, right? Based upon that form, we say, Lobsang is coming here, isn't it? We don't say that Lobsang's body is coming here or walking to me. We just say Lobsang is coming, isn't it? So that's, they use an example, say, that means apart from Lobsang's body, there is Lobsang, see? So that's what we see, Lobsang coming,
Oh, those just do it. Those that by you said it. Because that those should have been Pumbo de Convache, that on the share. That on the Conva didn't day that Pumbo didn't day of Gezerwa. That got on the key that didn't convert the Shambash that's the border. The chief tiny issue or that could be dark on Tower on Judge. That there's a post of Sharwa. What is your? Because leading to the day on Tagba in Sumara, leading that by his word. He said, go dig make a toy, tell it. Nigga will consult the Sigora. That's the Namun you take a tap by Sigora. He didn't have a Simogo, Ligi here to Toya Yorwa. He did not tap by Sigora. What is your tap by the it Pumbo laws your done, the nations that the Mara, and the Chame in Shibu said to Gangati Yongora. The book on Saya Tamja like it in the Chame with the Tabe Samjat Yomare. She's talking laws you last in the Taco Shansara Omara. That could delta yourself when the countries you're to here, Marva. In the Chame in Taba said, Hinisumra. Tell you Ramaji Da says,
So in the non-Buddhist schools of thought, my second footnote is basically referring to many Hindu philosophies here, right? That's when we say non-Buddhist, doesn't mean any other religious tradition. We just talk about the Hindu philosophy schools of thought. So that's why, in certain Hindu schools, they said, Taksi Ravanchagita, there is a, permanent, independent, right, self. Right, permanent independent self. And how do they come to posit that? Is they said, the self is permanent and independent. It's just simply housed in this body at the moment, isn't it? They said that our aggregates are like the house, and when we die, it's just like, we don't like this house, we just move into a new house. Yeah, so there is a self that leaves the old house and moves into the new house, new body. And that's how they said. So now, when we ask, okay, if such a self exists, how does it exist? Well, is there any basis for existence? Now this is where they struggle with that. How do we posit a self that's permanent, but what's the basis for that? That's why they said, it is a partless self. It has no parts. Because now they couldn't find anything they can, base it upon. Well, it is partless and independent self, isn't it? Yeah. So that's how all these other complications, right? I don't think in the beginning they think that the self is partless and independent. But when we poke them, okay, if you think such a self exists, how does it exist? What is its basis, foundation? Now they couldn't find any foundation that, it is partless. It's not dependent on anything. It's kind of independent of itself, right? This is how all these other viewpoints arises. Yes.
Data Pumba Shine, Pumba Tomba Jomare. That Pumba Chasona, Pumba Tomba did dead with me, Pumba Tomba lost your marva. She said, so Pumba of Day in the child with get that with Chipares. The music in the Tomba to the Kaka. Joling Mare,
Kunjab Gitaji,
was the Tonda of the Chigris. That got to Tina Tomba, Pumba Pachas, Pumba Tomba the Nanga, Dead, Tomba the Dead, Lord, there you are.
So something left from the previous explanation. So when in terms of a person called legend, his name of person, they're not going to say that the legend is a permanent, okay, because they know the legend is going to get old, the legend is going to get sick and going to die. But they said the Atma, the self of the legend, is a permanent, isn't it? So they differentiate between the legend and the soul or the Atma of the legend. The Atma or the self of the legend is permanent, partless, independent. Not the legend, he's going to die. Right? We know that. And so in the Vedic literature, we call Geshe, Hindu literature, sometimes they posit that there is a universal Atma or the soul, Da. Yeah? It's same. It's one kind for everybody. It's just that a little portion of this universal self is contained in different bodies, isn't it? Yeah? So it looks like you have one self, which is exactly the same as the universal soul, but for the time being, it is kind of residing in you. Yeah? So that's called your soul, right? Maybe use my name, like Tenzin's soul or the Atma. But the Tenzin's Atma is exactly the same as the universal Atma, that everybody has it. And the example Geshe gives to illustrate this point is, we say a vase, right? A vase, empty vase has a space in it, isn't it? Right? Now, if the vase breaks, that space becomes one with the outer space. So as a space, this outer space and the space in the empty vase is exactly the same thing. For the time being, the vase has contained a portion of the space. We call it vase space, isn't it? But in reality, the space in the vase and the outer space is exactly the same thing. When the vase breaks down, that space becomes a part of the outer space. Exactly the same thing. A part of Atma is contained in our bodies. When we die, that Atma becomes part of the universal Atma. Right? That's how sometimes in the Hindu Vedic literature they talk about.
But today, Chiraba Ganga Kansa, that they were Jibare. That Jigba is also you say the Tikaka, with that do you Chikpa Chikane. That Dango got it, Yabado, you should do the Timothy Kona is at the Lomosha to the Shawjora or Tire. That he can't say, can't say, Lomokama, the Session can't call they would do. You learn that the Timothy Kona in the law manu. Or Chedata, Dango, the Chiru, the Yabadish, or did I not talking about selling this or Tizuna, your race, the zero of the. That teacher to Tondo doing the Chijan Pigi Gomon to touch him as a Jora. 되게 체인데나리 요다.
Also.
다 자원한테 거는 직지를 거도 뒤걸로 야 삼로동도 요 말아.
Not right.
어디 체인데나리 요래. 당게 내려다 야.
Not right. So all the non-Buddhist schools of thought, meaning Hindus, they accept that self or Atma is permanent. Okay. Now, in terms of whether it is a partless or something else, they might have some different views, right? Some say yes, some say no. We might find differences. And those who are interested to know more about the different philosophical views about the self, Atma, or the soul in English, some of the really important resources actually is there is Shanta Rakshita's work called Seme Tekonani, which is something to do with I think the valid cognition reality. If I translate literally, Seme Tekonani. Yeah, Sema is valid cognition, Brahmana. Tekonani is the reality. By Shanta Rakshita. But Geshe said he himself has not read the original text, but he read a commentary on this written by Kamal Shila. It's called the commentary on the Gyeltsen, right? Great valid cognition. Or you can also read in the Baba Viveka's the blaze of reasoning, Toke Barba in Tibetan, right? Toke Barba, the blaze of reasoning by Baba Viveka. Then you will find different viewpoints and refuting those viewpoints, okay? And then, all of them, if you kind of, the Gomang College of the Debung Monastery, they have something called the Gomang Drupta Chemo, the great tenets of the Gomang College, right? Not the actual text itself, but in the annotations, then you will find a lot of explanations about these viewpoints and the refutation of these viewpoints, okay? So those are the sources people who would like to go and find more about, right, in this subject. And so I think we have to leave there for today, and we would like to welcome your questions and observations.
Question?
Yeah, give to Geshe and all the way, yeah.
In regards to the self-sufficiently substantial self, we talked about how the way it shows up is that it's separate from the aggregate. I've also heard that it also shows up as the same as the aggregate as well. So it would be like, we would think of, we don't think there's a feeling of happiness coming. We think, I'm happy. So we equate the self with the aggregate. So what does Geshe have to say?
Okay. Tanda keng di kanang bruwa kaso koreta kanza rangja debe zeyo ki nawa chata sung min ba ge. Kaso pungpo di shibu jeju chuna tuga de pade yaga chulen sanga zo di ta rangja debe zeyo ba ta re sung bruwa. Yang kachal kwanang nere je ko chung sanga kanza rangja debe zeyo ki ta gi nawa di pungpo le ta debe ta inbe chaba me pungpo de chik ba yin ro ba. Pungpo de ro ba. Kanza de bra kanza rangja debe zeyo ki ta di pungpo de chik ro ba. Pena nga zo solwe pungpo le sa we so so chowa 가린 요거 yin ro ba gen. Ma chowa dewa nyo sama sam se chowa dewa de nga yin sam de ro ba gen. 그래서 kanza rangja debe zeyo ki ta di pungpo de chik do zimba de yung ro we so do ta de ma yin ba.
아니 로제 때문에 지으서는 다 로제 때문에 지으서는 용어 단단한도 로제 때문에 지으서도 각자 되셔고 봐.
나온디.
다 지당은 타니 되면 다세 근데 레규네 가게 다 다세기 탈바토 그래서 녀와 연구에서 다죠 말에. 이 타니 예바 다 들어와.
나래.
다 들라 근데 풍부 nga자는 게야 샘지오 동게 어때 다 비지 소울 동게 요래 다버져 요래. 티야 가야 돼 말다. 다 레리 용거 줘라. 어디 가서. 다버져 요래. 가지 심지도 잡아. nga자 용도 가지 심지도 돼서 타니 되면 다 되다. 가야 돼 말에.
알아 랑제도 베제이 또 다도 고 타데랑 샤고.
아, 네 타데랑 샤. 노 샤야 돼.
Geshe says excuse me. I want to exchange this body for a better one, actually. In terms of that notion of self-sufficient, substantial existent I, or the self, he said, that is always regarded as something separate from the aggregates. Nobody thinks one way. Where you are talking about probably comes from where, when we talk about, there is a conventional I of the self, right? Self exists conventionally. Now we ask different schools, what is that self? So some say it is all the 5 aggregates. Others say it's some of them. And somebody say it's only the mental aggregate that is that self. So people have different viewpoints, whether it's one of the aggregates or some of the aggregates or all of the aggregates. But in terms of self-sufficient, substantial existence, it's always considered something separate from. Yeah.
There, that manzo raja de da ka the phumbo lo so yo ma yang ja yo ka ra ba.
Not there.
Da phumbo lo ben phumbo ngo ji yong go ra ba.
Not there.
Ngo ji yong ga da phumbo de ji de ta de so wa de de so de de se. Ni ga da ze da ka je da ta de tu na. Da phe sha de de ku shi de ne ku shi sha sha go ra.
Not there.
Je wa len ge de sha go re.
Not there.
Da ku shi me ne che yi gi na yi sha jo ma re.
No, no.
Je wa len dong ge ji.
No,
Wo di da ngo ne ta sa ta 되게 내도 용 다 상제게서는 다 녀완족에서는 어디 샤고다 다 땅도 찌들다
Not there.
나도 맞는데 거다 너 보통야 거나 샤는 디그라
Not there.
그 린데 녀여 봐
Not there.
디 땅도 째서 너 디남 일 샤고다
No, sir. So what we're saying is that, self may appear to us as if it is self-sufficient and substantially existent. But is there such a self or the Atma? No. Okay? So we said there couldn't be a self, such a self that exists completely distinctive and separate from the aggregates, which means it has to be dependent on the aggregates, right? Now the question arises, is one of the aggregates that self, or is some of them, or is it, what is it, right? And so those who assert Gyeltsen, mind basis of all, or the fundamental consciousness, Gyeltsen, they say that through under analytical investigation, whether the self is one of the aggregates or not, then they find that finally that mind basis of all is that self. That's how they come to agree. And others who don't accept such a consciousness, mind basis of all, then they say it's the mental consciousness, that is the self, right? So we find different viewpoints, right? When we say it cannot be separate from the aggregate, then they said, okay, how, in what way it is dependent on the aggregate? Is it one of the aggregates? So different viewpoints come up.
I thought Geshe was going to say something else.
Yeah.
So are we then equating the what we call the independent, unitary, unaffected self with the self-sufficiently substantial self? Are we equating these two?
Oh,
Because it seems like
I don't
we
think so.
are,
Okay.
but
Okay.
can we double check?
No, I can, yeah, right. I'm on this some good wa. 강사 랑자 퇴베 제유에서 강사들 와게.
아래
양 딱지 랑완제기 다서 강사들 와. 니니 든지 샤고래 카카샤고래 소래.
다 다지 랑화제 세아도와
나.
랑화제 세아디 피지 직바래
나.
다 랑화제 걸 딱바다 차미니야 자로와
나.
어디 치료 누디려 그래
나.
그 랑화제 직바래 다 풍보로서 자로와 직바래
다 알아 당자 랑자 퇴베 제유 다서는 아주 낭백해lên 됐고.
어
낭백 받다 케스는 디바 빵아야 되셔
다 먼저게 딱이 랑화제 다 켈레 말이 랑제 때문에 다 니가 켈레고 말아 다 싫어 니가 켈레 랭고와 어디 단다 딱이 랑화제서 랑화세한테 피지다 예 삼두를 랑화세한테 다 풍소로 샤다가 찍바래 다 디가 nombe도 가르치고서는 딱 봐서 샤미니 성으로 nombe 작작이 찍바래 걔도 찍바래 다 그때 다다간도 랑제들 다 또한다 딱지라 랑화제 다 또아니 때 타라 주고 그래서는 강사 따바 모임 또서는 엔터지 랑화제서 배워래도 와 그래서 야지킹도 소번직사 말에 어디 디데 티 타라 때저 모두 초직 버려
할 차대 단다 딱지 랑완제기 다대 차
성버디 라가요 다
할라가
이거 노미니 잡셔 와 딱 봐다 샤미니 잡셔 와 이제 시에데 그 딱바다 샤미도 또 라요 와 매우 또 라요 어디 지도 그 미드다 아니 그 딱이 랑화제다 동아도 그 랑제데다 동아도 말아 와 샤미다 가 샤미 많이 봐 딱바 많이 또나 단도 풍보로 놓아서 매버다 또 말아 와 어디 봐 딱이 랑화제 라가셰 랑제데 또한테 차
In some way, they're a little related, but they're not one and the same thing. In terms of where we say self-sufficient, the notion of independence is exactly the same thing. Okay? But in the case of the one we said takpa is permanent, chipo is spotless, and Ramanjan is independent. This notion of the self, relatively speaking, we say is more coarser notion. It's little easier to get rid of, okay? Because it's easier to understand how the self is not permanent, how the self is not partless. It has parts, so it's easier to know that. So relatively speaking, self-sufficient, substantially existent self-notion is little subtler in a sense, right? Notion that. So they're not one and the same thing. Somewhere there's some kind of related. It's almost as if we have added more things to that self-sufficient notion of self, permanent and partless, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Anybody else? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, regarding the two methods of developing compassion, we've, as far as I know, I've only heard two methods. The one using all beings my mother and Shantideva's method of exchanging self and other. But you called those the two predominant methods that are taught. That made me wonder, are there any other methods that utilize concepts that we don't usually hear about, different methods or ideas or concepts other than those two ways?
Sure. Kurang kandi shwe di sigur ta nganzo changju semjong che de li ya ta yong sta ba ba de le nam ju song da chi de jun de menga tyen da da shen yam ju song ba ba ge ta yong sta ba song da che le che wen na an di mai be ge yang changju semjong de yo ro ba so ro nam ju ma she de
ta de ka de da ta nganzo da gi stel va ti ro ta che da bi ge sim che za che bu shi go ya da de ge ji de xian da ye ji le wa ta de de nga mi se xie ma ni xiao ju sim ta che da xiong ni ce de ge xiong ni xie ba ni xie ro ba ti ma gi ta tim ji pi ji ti na mang di ba de ji ma de
no so
ti ma de se ma de
no Geshe says that those are the two techniques most widely known and we call predominant. But I don't know whether there's any other technique beside them, right, to develop bodhicitta. But I'm kind of assuming that in terms of thinking about, the importance to cherish sentient beings like that, we might other ways of doing it. But beside those two techniques, he doesn't know. But he thinks that if there exists anything else, there must still could be inclusive within. That could be related to, included within those two techniques. Right, yeah. Right, so then I'm just didn't machine to make yo mar wada. That's right, yeah. One of the two or integrated one, right? Yeah, we use it. Yeah. Any other question? Where is the mic? Yeah. I think Latmir has a question. Yeah.
About the sense that the I is separate, or independent, or different from the aggregates, which was explained that it's an indication that of the presence of a mind of a self-sufficient self and substantially existent self. Isn't it also an indication of the presence of a mind of grasping at the intrinsic existence of the self?
Okay.
Yeah. So it's kind of a non-specific indicator of different things, not just the presence of substantial existent and self-sufficient, but also intrinsic.
Right,
yes.
right. Sorry, I'm going to be very noisy. Tagi kengi kansa rangja thwebe zeyu yi tongbe da ta chana sumbarwa yedan karese de kalata ji phungbo di yaga di yangne chebya chune chego samsang jor sumbarwa dinde di samlo di and kansa rangja thwebe zeyu yi ta kinangju ki ndubje ta mai ba ane ta di rangwen ndubje ta ji yebe nangju shane dig marwe so da ndubje chikba bana
rangwen so se dile ya cha ya le da da phungbo gang le xiao da raja to was phungbo lo xiao ro ba da ru da ma zu phungbo lo xiao ma phungbo ding de da xiao ro ba
la le
ti ju phungbo ding de da xiao ma da lo da sa mo me la ro ba
la le
ti ju de rangwen so da di kho de le yo ma phungbo ding de ro ko phungbo lo so de ka yo ma phungbo ding da de ro ba sa da
ale no ale konje kakju de rangje de beje ka bale de inje 다 저도 갈 풍부 때를 샤고
풍부 다 근데 타니 다 가서 풍부 때를 샤야 되더라 봐 로스요 말이스라 봐 다 되게 로스 메바 마시 풍부 때라요 말이스 라로 빠르디
Geshe said no, that notion of self does not indicate intrinsic reality. The reason is in the lower Buddhist schools of thought, especially, they said there is no self that exists separate from the aggregates, right? There is no self-sufficient, substantial existence. But then we said, okay, self exists. How does it exist? It's dependent on the aggregates. So some of them says maybe it is the mind or it's the fundamental consciousness or whatever. So they always find a way attached to the aggregates. All of them, some of them, one of them, right? But according to Prasangika, they said not only that self doesn't exist distinctively independent of the aggregates, but it does not exist, within or among the aggregates. It's just simply a label, imputation, isn't it? So that notion doesn't come up here. Yeah. No.
어디 다다 이게 단다 너무 팀을 해야 돼. 뒤에 해다 다다 치료 부모 놓아서 하. 남배 부모도 뭐지 샤워라.
Right.
지나 풍부 때문에 샤워라.
Right.
다 뒤에 야야도 태교 풍부 때문에 샤워 말아.
Right.
제가 노동을 어마어마 고민 받기 시작이도. 이제도
So that's precisely the reason why I said I want to spend little time talking about the common view of selflessness. According to the non-Buddhist schools of thought, my footnote, the Hindu schools, right? They said there is a permanent self distinctive from the aggregates. So self is something apart from the aggregates, distinctive. Now all the Buddhist schools of thought said no. Okay, no such self exists. So the self-sufficient, substantial existing self or permanent, partless, independent self doesn't exist, right? Self exists dependent upon the aggregates. So they said maybe the 5 aggregates, maybe some of them, maybe one of them. That's how they struggle with it, the lower school of thought. So that helped us to launch for the next Prasangika's viewpoint. Prasangika said, you know what? You're right. There is no self that exists independent of the aggregates, but there is no such a self that you can find among the aggregates. It's just a label onto the collection of, right? So that's how it becomes much subtler viewpoint. Okay, so that's how we said studying other schools of thought is like a rungs in the staircase. We lead to the understanding the higher up notions better and better, right? Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure now that you said that the view of self being independent. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the sense that Geshe described. The sense that we have.
Yeah,
it's not a view. Is it the same thing?
Right.
It's not a view. We have the sense that the self is that I'm different from, like you said, the body.
Right.
Get rid of this body.
Right.
Yeah.
But you said, is that also an indication of intrinsic self?
Yes.
Right. He said no. Yes.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
That's clear.
Yes. Yes.
What are he mentioned a couple of texts, such as Elucidation of the Path to Liberation and Yogic Bhumis.
Okay.
Who are they by?
I see. Namde thalam seje yorwake.
어리
Namde thalam suize bresa.
예달 무지.
Gesabe.
예달 무지.
Gyeltsen muche.
예달 무지. 예달 탈마든지.
Gyeltsen namari jong ti song la.
예달 성교라. 예달 탈마든지.
And the next dagi di song song nenju jebe sa song bege.
데 파워 통메.
Where I said Nandel Talam Seje, like illumination of the path to liberation, something how I translate. That's by the Geshe Dharma region, right? Sitting next to Lama Tsongkhapa. And then we talk about the yogic level of the path, Nenjor Chöbe Sa. That's by the Asanga. Yeah. Sure.
Question about the 4 dark practice, the 4 light rather practices, that which one of them counteracts the disparaging of bodhisattvas, and the recommendation, the advice is given that one should regard all the Buddhas, all the bodhisattvas as Buddhas.
Yes.
Now, in the Lamrim Chenmo, though, it says that the bodhisattvas are those who have taken the vows. So not necessarily just merely taking the bodhisattva vows, which means that it doesn't say that they need to have developed spontaneous, non-contrived bodhicitta. This is what it says in the text. It's not clear. Maybe I'm not clear.
No, say it again. Yeah.
By bodhisattva, Jerry Poche means people who have taken the vows of the precepts of aspiring bodhicitta, as well as the vows of engaging bodhicitta. Not necessarily those who have only developed spontaneous and contrived bodhicitta.
Oh, I see. Not to disparage bodhisattva means
yes.
include all of them, right? That's what you're saying.
Yes,
Okay.
including which means that
Right.
basically all of us here, those who have taken the
Right.
bodhisattva vows, according to the text, should be considered as bodhisattvas
Okay.
and Buddhas.
Okay, I'll check with him.
All right.
Tagi di nagwe chushi pama ta kabe chushi tembe se jorwa gen
Ore,
dinalia ane chanju sambalia da ma nyeb se jorwa gen
ore,
di ka chanju samba se di korang koda chen lamrin den shedan chebe ina da chanju samba ngwe ina da mi changsam yorwa gyu
ore,
di mene changdom lamba ge rowa
ore,
chanju ngwe men da da mene da men sem shama geshe jo yorwa
ore,
di ka changma le chanju samba sigme ros rowa changma lo ma me se rowa gen di inba ina da bana ngazu de ba changdom lenge kanga yorwa gen di shela ma me se o dinde kuju yo ma ro so changma chanju samba an sangye ta ko se jo rowa
ale tete mare, 다 정주 세번 매가 가서 ngaba mayo jiwa se de 정주 세 용게 대랑 세고 다
ale no so
정주 세 쟁이 지어라
Lare.
어 딘델 다 ngaba mayo jiwa se ngaba mayo se 다
No.
미니 뭐 jiwa 레도 아래야
No. No, nomba lemba zame sigo marwa.
너무 내가 지금 이거 그 정주 세 말이 말라 근데 유 정주 세 마샤도 그다 정주 세 말아
No.
유 정주 세 말에 네 되게 ngaba mayo ji어나
Right.
인 되게 라도
Lare.
시리단다 먼저 동발렌자 정주 세 민게 되는 유 정주 세 말이 말아
Lare no. In that context, Geshe says the bodhisattvas are to be understood as real bodhisattvas with bodhicitta, not the ones who have taken bodhisattva vows aspiring bodhicitta. Yeah.
Okay, just to clarify, so when we talked about all the Buddhist schools below the Prasangika that say the I is one of the aggregates or combination of the aggregates or something about or consciousness of by, so to them that's the conventional I to those schools.
Right.
But from the Prasangika point of view, that I that they're positing is not conventional. We know that. So then from the Prasangika point of view, are we saying their way of seeing the I, that's also categorized under the self-sufficiently substantial self, or are we putting that in a whole other category?
Okay. Kona ka di shugora. Tata ki di shungwa ge ngazo 강사 랑자 되베 제유 그 강사 다지 바까브로 와
아래
자네 당 아주 두다 오마 zor이야 아니 강사 세대 걸다디 풍부 라 템버 샤윈 거로 와게
아래
풍부 상마레 생 카시레 생 직레 생 다 무시에 거로 와게
아래
디 치디오 갈다 간지 디 타니도 유베 다드스 거로 와게
아래
치디오 갈라 다 단다 텐조베 그 때베이나 단다 두다 오마리 샤베 타니도 유베 다데 고 딕데 요마로 와서 거로 와게
어디요 말
아 치디오 갈라 자다 텐조베 따다 잡는데 단다 두다 오마 샤베 타니 유베 다데야 다 단다 가서 다 고야지 요바게
아예
랑제도베 제유도베 다 홍도차거로 와서
다 다다디 거제 티주 다네 거제 다다 룹다 오마요 이게 다 타이에 이거 다 인사 줘로 와
라레.
어디 타이에 이거 샤워 말 그래서 위등리 샤워로 와
라레
티주 간가 또 루에 받아서 율 따로서 니야미 라차로 와
라레
틸라도 위등 니와 제jo 말로
라레.
어디 메라 와
지도 갈다디 간전이나 다 고아에 다 차도 그래 텐유 따비
티주 지는 거 뭐야 샤
랑제도베 제유 다 홍도래 랍동 말로 와
저희도 데데 말이지 다 틸데 차 주고 차 주고 와
라레
저희도 부로 놓아서 와
라레
다들 부부 간을 샤워로 와
yes you're right that as we refute self-sufficient substantially existent atma or the self, then the lower schools of Buddhist thought they always struggle with, right? Okay, there is a conventional self. So what is that? So some say it's all of the five aggregates, some say some of them, some say one of them, right? All the struggle with that. And from Prasangika Madhyamika point of view, what they posit as conventional self is still, a part of what we call something that need to be refuted. Basically, what the lower schools of thought is, there is a self that can be found under analysis, isn't it? And but according to Prasangika, there cannot be a self that is findable under analysis. So if you find anything under analysis, then you are still saying there is an intrinsic self. So that is not viable for the Prasangika. So from Prasangika point of view, we cannot say that the lower schools, Buddhist schools, the notion of self is part of the self-sufficient, substantially existent self, because that self doesn't exist. But it is still a self that requires refutation, right? Yeah. Maybe a subtle notion of self that requires refutation.
But it's not the inherent self nonetheless.
Yes, it is intrinsic self, according to Prasangika. So that cannot exist, right? According to Prasangika, whatever this conventional self that is posited in the lower schools of Buddhist thought that constitute intrinsic self, and that is not possible according to Pasangikas. Does that work? Yeah.
Well, I
Yeah.
I struggle though because I was listening to a teaching by His Holiness, and he was saying the method, where you say here's the I is one with the aggregates and I separate from the aggregates. Actually, the way his translator said it was interesting. He said, and what you do is you see the I as either having the same characteristics as the aggregates or not having the same characteristics as the aggregates. But either way, that method of with the aggregates or not, whether characteristics or not characteristics, is used for the self-sufficiently substantial self, and not a method to be used for refuting the inherent self. So this is where I'm starting to go.
Oh,
okay,
the
what's
method
going on here?
refutation of that. Okay. The morangi tanda di samji di dine shungi sarwa.
Ale,
Kunjung ki shungja na shab ji gyurde ba chingende sarwa.
ale,
Di na kin cheba cheta sungde garwa.
ale,
Situ ane kalsor ngana pungbu di ane kasata ta di pungbu da chigde pungbu da ta de le sang zu chigo rwa ge. Di cheba ki dine ke tablam di ngan kalsor ko kansa rangja tube zeyo ki ta goya ki tapshi res rwa ge. Mado chi ki dine di ane kalsor ko rangon rube ta go ge rwa ge. ane di tab mares dine sung sung se ko ta me rwa. Sa mo da de chuk de yo rwa ge. Di dine imba ne sa ta bana kunju judan chidu kala ta di 델리야 안 풍부기 체제 된여러 된여말 사직식으로 와게 안 풍부의 직동이 풍부의 타된 세기 제바디 랑야 퇴베 제유 기 다디 고야 레마도 랑은 르베 다 고야 말해서 니네 여미나게
ale, 다른 예시야, 당기시야 되래. 롱롱 다 고야 말다, 라자 다 고라라와.
라레.
대가라래.
no
다 롱롱 다 고도 영조 풍부 때래 샤사메 오셰니.
no
에네 다 다들 지디리도 오시나. 다 마시 요령으로
라레
에네 풍부 때는 여베이나. 에네 풍부 직타데 가로 요고 그랬시.
no
다 잭디요나. 에네 풍부 nga 나지 다 nga 요자자.
no
야면 다 지금 뭐히메 풍부라 지금 히메버로. 오차그 되게 릭바땅니. 근데 풍부된 메바 두고로.
라레
어때도 정말 메바 돼야 되나.
라레 no so As a matter of fact, what Geshe was explaining earlier, how there couldn't be a self-sufficient, substantial existence self apart from the aggregates, right? Actually, is part of that. It's similar to what His Holiness was saying. But later, probably we'll talk about different types of analysis, where we say, the reasoning to investigate whether self is one with the aggregates or different from the aggregates, right? So that will help us to understand how refuting even the intrinsic notion of self. Okay, so we will come to that in different analysis. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. We'll stop there and Kange lo de dimye jinde nyinda namda rabse chinye dungun chishin nije toga le bomze kanda sebe ram mendon donge yesebe dozo gola poje Yama zhuzhe yangde zon zhoda xie zhou nimo nimo leje xia zhou zhe ma le me se dong ne nyo wo xie nye zhi zhe dene da jie sa ju da zhe yuan de ya ze tu yu gu zhu zha zhu da zhu ni da le me jiang be yang lan de om ara ba zan na de Zen den je ra we ze ye da le de mo men ba ra se ne ka da ten ju shun lu to ba yi lo zhu bo na wa zen do so lo de jia zhe le zhong be ba de ge zang pong we ji du men ba xian ten ba zen la wang do ji chu chang nian shu gun zhe la so wan de Obeisance to my Guru and Protector Manjushri, who holds at his heart a scriptural text symbolic of his seeing all things as they are, whose intelligence shines forth as the sun, unclouded by delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of Father for his only Son, all creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You whose dragon thunder-like proclamation of Dharma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and free us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of ignorance. You who have been pure from the beginning, who have completed the stages of a bodhisattva, whose princely body is adorned with 112 marks of a Buddhist, I bow down to Manjushri, O Marapasanadi, O compassionate one, with the brilliance of your wisdom, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind and wisdom so that I may gain insight into Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. Like the sweet perfume of white lotus born in the ocean of knowledge, nourishing honeybees, the fortunate being, your fame pervades all directions. You are proficient and powerful in upholding the precious doctrine. To you, all of Santins in Wangda, respectfully I pray.
Nhất tâm kính lễ Đức Văn Thù Sư Lợi, bậc đại trí ngài điều phục hai chướng ngại, tựa nhật quang lan tỏa khắp mười phương, bậc thực chứng chân nghĩa màu rốt ráo, từ tim ngài bát nhã kinh thủ hộ nhiệm màu, cõi luân hồi chúng sanh thọ nghiệp báu, bị ngăn che bởi phiền não vô minh, sở hữu 60 pháp âm thủ thắng, cùng đại bi ngài hóa độ chúng sanh, tựa từ mẫu chăm lo cho quý tử. Tiếng rồng vang ngài thức tỉnh hữu tình, thoát khỏi vòng luân hồi nghiệp chướng, gươm trí tuệ ngài chặt đứt vô minh, tận diệt muôn vàn khổ đau cùng ách nạn. Ngài an trụ nơi thập địa pháp vân, báu thân ngài trang nghiêm thanh tịnh, 112 tướng hảo Như Lai, đê đầu đảnh lễ Đức Văn Thù Sư Lợi, cúi xin ngài tận diệt ám chướng vô minh. Om Arapasanadi. Con khẩn cầu dưới gót sen bậc đại trí, ban pháp lực diệt phiền não vô minh, được trí sáng con thâm nhập nghĩa màu, pháp vi diệu cùng muôn vàn luận giải. Như diệu hương ngọt ngào từ sen trắng, đản xanh nơi trí thù thắng đại dương, hàng thiện căn như ông mật thọ nương, hồng danh ngài khắp mười phương quảng bá, đấng thiện xảo uy dũng bảo tồn pháp bảo vô giá. Nam mô Lốp Sang Tenzin Quang Đắc. Xin cung kính trì niệm.
Niyanda yo me